Have you ever wanted to have 30 plus creatures on the battlefield at one time with ease? Well, I have a deck for you. Today's deck is built off Krenko Boss. He's a 4-drop 3/3, and you can tap him to create X 1/1 goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. Now, as you can imagine, this ability is going to get out of hand really fast. And with Krenko being such a great budget commander option, that is why I decided to brew around him today. And he's only like $4, so make sure you guys stick around, hit that subscribe and bell notification, drop a like on the video, and let's get into it. So the goal for this deck is going to be to play some goblins before we get Krenko out. Hopefully some of our goblins and other stuff that we have out can give Krenko haste when he comes out. And then immediately, as soon as we can, we're going to tap him, make a bunch of goblins, and if we can even get 2 taps off Krenko, it's going to cause a lot of damage on the board. You will see why in a bit, but so this ability is going to be really powerful, especially if we already have goblins to start out with. So yeah, let's hop right into the creatures. Also, just kind of a disclaimer, I'm only going to be covering like the key cards in this deck. Also, these are mostly just cards from my collection. I only purchased a few of these, so I'll probably be doing an upgrade guide on this deck. If you'd like to see that, drop a comment down below, let me know, and I'll definitely shoot one. So yeah. Alright, so let's go into the creatures of this deck, starting with Wily Goblin, which says, when Wily Goblin enters the battlefield under your control, create a colorless treasure token, which you can sack to add 1 mana of any color. So that's going to be some nice ramp for future turns to get Krenko out as soon as we can. Alright, next up is Goblin Tunneler. It's a 2-drop 1/1, and you can tap it, and it says target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. I'm just going to set this aside because there's a cool combo with that later that I will show you. Next up we have Battle Squadron. It's a 5-drop star flying, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. So I put this in the deck because, first of all, not a lot of goblins fly, so we definitely need some flying creatures in here to protect us from taking tons and tons of flying damage. And also, this can be a huge creature, and if your opponents have no flying, this is going to deal a ton of damage to them, because we're going to be making a bunch of creatures. Alright, next up is Relic Robber, which is part of that combo that I was telling you about. It's a 3-drop 2/2 haste, and it says whenever this deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless goblin construct artifact creature token with this creature can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, this creature deals 1 damage to you. So we have Goblin Tunneler on the battlefield. Tap it and make Relic Robber unblockable, and this can give them a bunch of those artifacts that will slowly ping them away. So that's a cool combo in this deck. The next goblin is Goblin Dark Dwellers. It is a 5-drop menace 4/4, and it says whenever Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into the graveyard this turn, exile instead. So this is great because we have a lot of combat tricks that are 3 or less, or like draw spells in here that are 3 or less, which you will be seeing later. So this is just gonna give us a lot of value, and then it's a big goblin, so that's nice. Next up is Torbrand, which is a very good card in this deck. It's a 4-drop 2/4, and it says if a red source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it does that much damage plus 2 instead. So all of our 1/1s that Krenko makes are basically going to be 3/1s with Torbrain out. So that's going to be really good. Also, we have a ton of direct damage. Like when creatures attack, it does damage to opponents. And this is just going to make it do that much damage +2. So really great card in this deck. Alright, next up on the list is Gem Palm Incinerator. It's a 3-drop, 2/1 with cycling for 2. And it says when you cycle Gem Palm Incinerator, you may have it deal X damage to target creature, where X is the number of goblins on the battlefield. So if we already have like 10 goblins out, which is not that hard to get in this deck, especially if we have Krenko out, this can basically one-shot any creature on the battlefield, so that's why it's in here. If your opponent has a dangerous creature out, just take care of it with this card, and then you also get the draw card on top of the cycle. Alright, so next up on the list is Goblin Rabblemaster. It's a 3-drop 2/2, and it says other goblins creatures you control attack each combat if able. At the beginning of combat on your turn, make a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste, and whenever a Goblin Rabblemaster attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking goblin. So this is mainly just in the deck to make more 1/1s. And then, even though it says all goblins have to attack each turn, we can just tap Krenko before combat so he can't attack, making a bunch of 1/1s. And then we'll have the blockers from Krenko, because they won't have haste to attack. And then Goblin Rabblemaster can also get huge, so that's great as well. Next up on the list is Brash Taunter. It's a 5-drop 1/1 with Indestructible, and it says whenever Brash Taunter is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent, and we can pay 3, tap Brash Taunter, and it fights another target creature. So if our opponent has a giant creature out, Brash Taunter is going to be the perfect play in this deck. Especially if it's like 6 power or above, this is going to be dealing 6 damage to that player every single turn. And even if we don't fight it, we can hold it up as a blocker, and this will definitely make your opponents not want to attack us. So, very great card in this deck. That's why it's in there. The next card up is Ember Hauler. It's a 2-drop 2/2, and you can pay 1, sack it, and it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Pretty straightforward. Next up is another Krenko. It's Krenko Tin Street Kingpin. It's a 3-drop 1/2, and it says whenever Krenko attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then create a number of 1/1 goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So, again, this is just going to make us a bunch of goblins, which is going to be really good when we get Krenko Mob Boss out. The next card up in this list, which I think is very cool actually, is Bloodline Pretender. It's a 3-drop 2/2 changeling, so it does count as a goblin because it's every creature type. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, so you're going to choose goblin. And then it says, whenever another creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So, or not on that creature, on Bloodline Pretender. So when we tap Krenko, make like a bunch of goblins, this is just going to get huge, and it's going to be very good for attacking, and then it also counts towards a goblin when we tap Krenko. So, very good card in this deck. Alright, the next goblin up on this list is Warren Instigator. It's a 2-drop 1/1 with Double Strike, and it says when Warren Instigator deals damage to an opponent, you may put a goblin card or a goblin creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So since Warren Instigator has Double Strike, it's going to deal damage to our opponents twice. So we get to put 2 goblin cards from our hand onto the battlefield. So definitely a great card. Played on turn 2, swing in on turn 3 to that one player who doesn't have any blockers, and get 2 goblin cards onto the battlefield. Very great card in this deck. The next card is Skirk Prospect. It's a 1-drop 1/1 goblin, and you can sack a goblin to add a red. Very straightforward, and this is going to be very good, especially when we start tapping Krenko, get a bunch of goblins, then we can just spend them on mana to play more goblins. Next creature is Goblin Chieftain. It's a 3-drop 2/2 with haste, and it says other goblin creatures you control get +1/+1 and have haste. So this is very good since we're going to be making a bunch of 1/1s. We want them to be big if possible, so this is going to make them big. And also, the haste effect is really important on here. So yeah, very good card in this deck. Next up is Goblin Motivator. It's a 1-drop 1/1, and we can tap it and target creature gains haste until end of turn. This is a great card, especially since you can play this on turn 1, tap it, and give like Warren Instigator haste. And then if it's still around, give Krenko Mob Boss haste when he comes out. Immediately tap for more goblins. Next up is Squee the Immortal. It's a 3-drop 2/1, and you can cast Squee from the graveyard or from exile. So we always have a card to cast with Squee, so that's amazing. Next up is Conspicuous Snoop, which is a underrated card in this deck. It's very good. It's a 2-drop 2/2. Play with the top card of your library revealed, so that kind of sucks because your opponents know what you have. But it says you may cast goblin spells from the top of your library, and as long as the top of your library, or the card on top of your library, is a goblin card, Conspicuous Snoop has all the activated abilities of that card. So this is going to be very good, especially with Skirk Prospect, because we can keep sacking all of the tokens from Krenko to make mana to keep casting all the goblins from the top of our library. So yeah, nice card in this deck. Next up is Goblin Glory Chaser. It's a 1-drop 1/1 with Reown 1, which means when this creature deals combat damage to a player, if it's not reowned, put a +1/+1 counter on it and it becomes reowned. And it says, as long as Goblin Glory Chaser is reowned, it has Menace. So a nice 1-drop in this deck. Next up is Goblin War Chief. It's a 3-drop 2/2, and it says goblin spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and goblin creatures you control have haste. So again, the haste, giving haste to all our goblins is so important in this deck, especially since we're going to be making a ton of them a turn. We want to attack with them right away. So yeah, it's very nice. And then also the discount is awesome too. Next up is Lava Step Rider. It's a 1-drop 1/2, and we can pay 3 to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. Then we have Goblin Diplomats, which is a 2-drop 2/1, and we can tap it and each creature attacks this turn if able. So we're going to have a bunch of blockers from Krenko after we tap him. So on an opponent's turn, if we want to swing at them and make them have no blockers, we can tap Goblin Diplomats. They'll have to attack on their turn. Hopefully they're not going to attack us because we have a bunch of blockers. But if they do, that's fine because, again, we have a bunch of blockers. Next up is Org Battle Driver, which is amazing in this deck. It's a 4-drop 3/3, and it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. So when we tap Krenko, all of our 1/1s are going to be 3/1 haste, which is insane. Next up is Goblin War Driver. It's a 2-drop 2/2 with Battle Cry, which means whenever this creature attacks, other attacking creatures get +1/+0. So very good for all-out attacking. Next up is Porphyros Bronze Blooded. It's a 5-drop 7/6 with Indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Porphyros is not a creature. But this devotion to red is not going to be hard to reach, especially since we're in a mono red deck. So yeah, that's great. Other creatures you control have haste. Also, that's really good, as I keep saying, because we want to attack as soon as we make the 1/1s. And then it says you may pay 3. You may put a red creature card or another artifact creature from your hand onto the battlefield. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So that's great if we want to all-out attack. We have some expensive stuff in this deck. Not really a whole lot, but we do have some, as you will see up next. So that's also a really nice ability to have on here. And then Indestructible is going to be great as well. Alright, next up is Thopter Assembly. It's a 6-drop flying 5/5, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Thopters other than Thopter Assembly, Return Thopter Assembly to its owner's hand and create 5 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. So this is great in this deck because we don't have much flying creatures like as blockers and such. So this is a great way to get some flying attackers and blockers. Next up, we have Ox of Agonas. It's a 5-drop 4/2, and it says when Ox of Agonas enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. Then you can escape it for 2 red, exile 8 other cards from your graveyard, and you may cast this card from your graveyard for paying its escape cost after you escape it. And then it says Ox of Agonas enters or escapes with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is great. Obviously, you really only want to play this if you have like a dead hand or a very small hand or no hand. And then after it dies, you're going to be able to draw again from it. So that's a great value from this card. Next up is Runaway Steamkin. It's a 2-drop 1/1, and it says whenever you cast a red spell, if Runaway Steamkin has fewer than 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you can remove 3 +1/+1s and add 3 mana. Sorry, I kind of explained that weird. You can put a +1/+1 counter on it unless it has 3. So this is great for adding mana, obviously, to just play more cards. Next up is Tin Street Dodger. It's a 1-drop 1/1 with haste, and we can pay 1 to make it unblockable except for creatures with defender. So this is great. Just attack each turn. Also, it's a 1-drop, so as long as we can get it out before Krenko, it's good in this deck. Next up is our second Proferos, God of the Forge. It's a 4-drop 6/5 with indestructible. It says as long as your devotion is less to red is less than 5, it's not a creature. Again, that's not hard to meet since we're in a mono red deck. And then it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Proferos does 2 damage to each opponent. And then you can pay 3, and creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So obviously all the abilities on Proferos are good, but the one that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Proferos does 2 damage to each opponent. So whenever we tap Krenko and all those 1/1s enter, it's going to do 2 damage for each 1/1, and that's insane value in this deck. So it's going to be dealing a bunch of direct damage to our opponents. Or to each opponent, actually. So yeah, we can hit them all at once. Next up is Hobble Fiend. It's a 2-drop 2/1 with trample, and we can pay 1 to sacrifice another creature and put a +1/+1 on it. So if we attack, some of our 1/1s get blocked, and like nothing's gonna happen to them. We can just sack them to Hobble Fiend and make it a giant trample creature. So that's nice. And the final creature that I decided to feature is Terror of the Peaks. It's a 5-drop 5/4 with flying, and it says spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast, so it kind of protects itself in that sense. And then it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So again, just like Proferos, when we tap Krenko, we get a bunch of creatures, and then we can deal that damage to any target this time. So that's nice. Take away some of their creatures that are being dangerous to us. And yeah, just a great card in this deck. And since this is a budget build, I guess I should mention that Terror of the Peaks and Proferos, God of the Forge, are fairly expensive cards, like around $10 each, I think, maybe 15 each. So obviously you can just swap these out for any goblins that are not in the deck, because that'll work. So yeah. Alright, moving on to the artifacts. First up, we have Embercleave. It's a 6-drop legendary artifact equipment with flash, and it says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. When Embercleave enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample, and it's equip 3. So ideally, we're going to be casting this for 2 red, immediately equipping it onto one of our attacking creatures to give it +1/+1 and double strike. And if we have or the battle driver, stuff like that, that gives our creatures buffs. We have a lot of things that buff our goblins. This can actually deal an insane amount of damage, and your opponents will not see it coming because obviously has flash. So just a great card in this deck. Alright, next up we have Doom Cannon. This is a very fun card, by the way. It's a 6-drop artifact. As Doom Cannon comes into play, choose a creature type. So we're going to choose Goblin, and then we can pay 3, tap it, sacrifice a creature of the chosen type, and Doom Cannon does 3 damage to target creature or player. So each turn we can pay 3, sack one of our 1/1s, and deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So this is really nice to get rid of some of those pesky creatures and then keep hitting our opponents in the face. Next up is Spare Supplies. Just to draw us a few cards. It's a 2-drop. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters, draw, and then you can pay 2, tap it, sack it, and draw a card. Next up is Brittle Igifi. This is a nice card to get rid of a creature. It's a 1-drop artifact, and then we can pay 4, tap it, and exile target creature. Next up is Pyrite Spellbomb. Very versatile card for a 1-drop artifact. You can pay 1 red, sack it, and it deals 2 damage to any target, or pay 1, sack it, and draw a card. Next up is a very fun card in this deck, Goblin Charbelcher. So, it's a 4-drop, and we can pay 3, tap it, reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a land card. Goblin Charbelcher deals damage equal to the number of non-land cards revealed this way to target creature or player. If the revealed land card was a mountain, Goblin Charbelcher deals double that amount of damage instead. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in any order. So, most of our lands in this deck are mountains, obviously, because it's a mono-red deck. So this can just deal a bunch of damage to our opponent's face, or I think it can deal it, to creatures too. So that's nice. And just a great way to get our opponents low on health. Next up is Maze Mind Tome for card draw and card selection. It's a 2-drop artifact. We can tap it and put a page counter on it and scry 1. We can pay 2, tap it, put a page counter on it and draw a card. And then when it has 4 or more page counters on it, exile it and we gain 4 life. Next up is Vanquisher's Banner. It is a 5-drop artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. So obviously, we're going to choose Goblin, buffs all our goblins, and keeps drawing us a bunch of cards, so that's very nice. Next up is Heraldic Banner. It's a 3-drop artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color, obviously red. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+0, and then we can tap it, add 1 mana of the chosen color. So nice ramp and buffing our creatures. Now we will be moving on to the enchantments. Starting with Goblin Slide, it's a 3-drop enchantment. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may pay 1. If you do, put a 1/1 Goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield. So nice way to make some goblin attackers before Krenko gets out, or after, obviously. Anytime is great. Next up is Roiling Vortex. It is a 2-drop enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, this deals 1 damage to them. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex does 5 damage to that player, and you can pay 1. Your opponents can't gain life this turn. So, since our deck is a fast-paced deck, the 1 damage to each player doesn't really affect us that much. This is mainly just in the deck. Obviously, I built my deck off my collection. As I said, if you'd like to see an upgrade guide, leave a comment down below and I will for sure make that. But I go against a lot of Storm decks, and also Colton has a life gain deck, so this is why I put this in here, and it's very nice against those. So if you go up against those type of decks, Roiling Vortex is a nice include. Next up is Warstorm Surge. It is a 6-drop enchantment, and it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So same thing as what's it called? Terror of the Peaks, but it's a budget option also if you can put both in here because we make a bunch of creatures, so it's nice. Next up is Cavalcade of Calamity. It's a 2-drop enchantment, and it says whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade of Calamity does 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So a nasty combo with this card, since all of our goblins that Krenko makes are 1/1s, is with Torbrand, because technically it doesn't give them extra power, it just makes them does more damage. So this will deal 3 damage whenever a 1 power creature attacks. So that's insane. And then all of our 1/1s are actually 3/1s, but not really because they still have base power 1. So that's a nice combo in this deck. Works very well. And our last enchantment is Experimental Frenzy. It's a 4-drop enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library. You can't play cards from your hand, and you may pay for it and sacrifice destroy Experimental Frenzy. So I feel like this card is very underrated in Commander. So let me explain why. So first of all, you're going to be playing cards from the top of your library. So if you have the mana, you're not going to stop until you can't play another land. And then all those turns that you're not able to play cards from your hand, obviously you're going to draw the top card of your library. And then once you destroy your Experimental Frenzy because you want to play cards from your hand, it's like you just drew all the cards that are in your hand. So great card to run through your deck and get some more cards into the battlefield. Alright, moving on from the enchantments onto the sorceries. We have Destructive Tampering, which is a 3-drop sorcery. Choose 1. Destroy target artifact or creatures without flying can't block this turn. So this is going to let our goblins come in for a bunch of damage out of nowhere. Very nice card. And then also it's optional to destroy an artifact too, so that's nice as well. We have Repeating Barrage, which is a 3-drop sorcery, and Repeating Barrage does 3 damage to target creature or player. And then it has Raid for 5. Return Repeating Barrage from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only if you attacked with a creature this turn. It's not hard to attack with a creature in this deck since we have a bunch of them. So, yeah. Next up is Devil's Play. It's a X and 1 red, and it does X damage to target creature or player, and then we can flash it back for 3 and X. Next up is Light Up the Stage. It's a 3-drop sorcery, but it has Spectacle 1, which means if you can pay its Spectacle cost if an opponent lost life this turn. And exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the next turn, you may play those cards. So this card is really good with Goblin Dark Dwellers because, well, all the 3 and less mana instant sorceries are. But, so yeah, just keep that in mind, that Goblin Dark Dwellers is also in this deck. We have Act of Treason to steal an opponent's creature. Goblin Grenade, 1-drop sorcery, sack a goblin, and it deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Hordeling Outburst to make 3 1/1 goblins for 3. Cleaver Riot for 5 gives all our creatures double strike until end of turn, so nice combat. Magmatic Chasm to make creatures without flying unable to block this turn. Burn at Stake is a great card in this deck and is so fun to play. It's a 5-drop sorcery. As an additional cost to Burn at Stake, tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Burn at Stake does damage to target creature or player equal to 3 times the amount of creatures tapped this way. So if we tap even 10 1/1s, this is going to deal 30 damage to an opponent. And 10 1/1s is nothing in this deck. So this card can easily one-shot your opponents very fast. So a very fun and nice include in this deck. Next up is Relentless Assault to give us another combat phase. And then we have Blaze, which is X and a red, and it deals X damage to target creature or player. And this deck actually does run 2 Planeswalkers. The first of which is Chandra, Acolyte of Flame. It's a 3-drop, and it enters with 4 loyalty. You can pay 0 and put a loyalty counter on each red Planeswalker you control. And pay 0, make 2 1/1 elementals with haste, sack them at your next end step, which would be the end step of the turn you make them. I know some people get confused on that one. And then you can -2 her and cast target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard, and then exile it. And then the other Chandra is from War of the Spark. It's a 4-drop for loyalty, and it has a static ability that says whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from this Chandra, she deals that much damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So this is very good because if we do her ultimate or she just dies, it's still going to deal damage to your opponent. So that's very nice. And then for her actual abilities, her +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then her -7 is exile the top 7 cards of your library, and you may play them this turn. But -7 her will also deal 7 damage to target opponent or planeswalker, so that's nice. And moving on to the instants, we have Wild Ricochet. It's a 4-drop instant, and choose new targets for target instant or sorcery spell, then copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So basically a counter spell in red, and then we get to copy it and do it again. Yeah, so it's a very fun card, especially if somebody goes to destroy Krenko, which I guarantee that'll happen a few times. We got Lightning Axe for 1 red. It's an instant. As an additional cast to Lightning Axe, discard a card or pay 5, and it deals 5 damage to target creature. And then we have Burn Bright to give all of our creatures +2 +0 until end of turn as a nice combat trick. And yeah, that's really it for this video. Please leave a like and comment down below what you want to see next. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.